The Silver Fork had always been a place of warmth. A small family-style restaurant tucked between towering buildings. Its charm was in the little things: the inviting glow of pendant lights, the faint hum of jazz from the overhead speakers, and the clatter of silverware against ceramic plates. It smelled of freshly baked bread, seared steaks, and the kind of home-cooked meals that kept customers coming back. But tonight, there was something else in the air. Something colder. Daniel Carter adjusted the stiff collar of his janitor's uniform, running a hand over the cap that hid his face just enough. It had been years since he stepped foot in his own restaurant without being recognized. Yet, here he was, in the role of an unnoticed observer, moving among his employees as nothing more than a faceless worker. He pushed a mop across the floor, his sharp eyes scanning the room, taking in the rhythm of the night. That was when he spotted him. Ethan. A young man in his mid-20s, sleeves rolled up, an apron tied neatly around his waist, carrying a tray of dishes with the effortless grace of someone who took his work seriously. He maneuvered through tables with a practiced ease, offering customers genuine smiles, engaging them with casual conversation. He wasn't just doing his job, he cared. It was a rare quality, one Daniel always admired in his best employees. And then there was Mark, the restaurant's manager. Mark leaned against the bar, arms crossed, watching Ethan with an expression that made Daniel pause. There was something unsettling in the way his eyes lingered, a simmering disdain barely masked by indifference. "Still sucking up, huh?" Mark muttered under his breath. His voice was low, but Daniel, just a few feet away, caught it. Ethan didn't respond. If he heard the insult, he didn't acknowledge it. Instead, he set the tray down, wiped his hands on a napkin, and turned toward Mark. "Table 4's asking for extra sauce. We're low on the house blend. Should I mix a fresh batch?" Mark scoffed, barely glancing at him. "Yeah, sure. And while you're at it, why don't you scrub the kitchen floor, too? Maybe if you work hard enough, you'll get a gold star." A few of the other employees glanced over but quickly looked away, pretending not to hear. Ethan hesitated, just for a moment, then nodded. "Got it." He walked off toward the kitchen. Daniel kept his expression neutral, though something inside him tightened. He had been watching all night, and one thing was becoming clear. Mark didn't just dislike Ethan. He resented him. The night wore on, the restaurant buzzing with life. Orders came and went, customers chatted, forks scraped against plates. Daniel worked silently, sweeping near the counter when he heard a low voice from the hallway leading to the back office. "It's time to put Ethan in his place." Daniel froze. It was Mark's voice. He didn't turn, didn't react, but his grip on the broom tightened. He moved subtly, adjusting his position, angling himself toward the hallway without making it obvious. "You sure?" Another voice whispered. A lower, uncertain tone. "You think I don't know what I'm doing?" Mark hissed. "He walks around here like he owns the place, like he's better than the rest of us. People need to learn where they stand. And if Ethan thinks hard work is enough to make him untouchable, well, we'll see about that." There was a pause. Then a hesitant, "What exactly are you planning?" Mark chuckled. "Just watch." The conversation ended. Footsteps retreated, and Daniel was left gripping the broomstick, heart beating steadily beneath his disguise. Something was coming. Hours passed, and the crowd began to thin. The restaurant wound down for the night, chairs lifted onto tables, the air filled with the scent of lemon-scented cleaner. Ethan was one of the last to finish up, wiping down the counter while Mark stood near the register, counting the night's earnings. Mark turned, snapping his fingers. "Ethan. Safe deposit." Ethan looked up. "Me?" "Yeah, you. Take the register money, put it in the safe. Don't mess it up." Daniel watched as Ethan hesitated. There was a flicker of something in his expression, uncertainty. He glanced around, as if realizing this task, usually reserved for senior staff, was suddenly his responsibility. But then he nodded, wiping his hands on his apron. "All right." He stepped behind the counter, carefully gathering the bills. His fingers moved with precision, counting out the cash before heading to the back office. Daniel moved subtly, his position shifting just enough to catch sight of Mark as he watched Ethan disappear into the room. Then Mark did something strange. He smiled. It was a knowing smile, a triumphant one. And in that moment, Daniel knew. This wasn't just a routine task. It was a setup. Minutes later, Ethan returned, wiping his hands on his apron. All set. Mark didn't even look up. Good. You're done for the night. Ethan nodded, grabbed his bag, and made his way toward the door. The remaining employees were finishing up as well, chatting quietly, exhaustion settling over them after the long shift. Daniel continued his work, but his attention was on Mark, who lingered near the office, his fingers tapping against the counter. Then, a sharp intake of breath. What the hell? Mark's voice cut through the air like a blade. Everyone turned. Mark stormed out of the office, his face a mask of anger. The safe. Money's missing. A heavy silence fell over the restaurant. Ethan, barely a step from the exit, turned slowly. What? Mark's eyes locked onto him. You were the last one in there. You counted the money. And now it's gone. Ethan paled. I didn't take anything. Really? Mark stepped closer, waving a slip of paper. Because the register count doesn't match what's in the safe. You wanna explain that? Murmurs rippled through the staff. Eyes darted between Ethan and Mark. Ethan's voice wavered. I don't know what happened. I put everything in, I swear. Mark scoffed. You expect me to believe that? The only person who had access was you. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. His hands clenched at his sides. I wouldn't steal from this place. Mark shook his head in mock disappointment. You know, I really thought you were different. Hard-working. Honest. But I guess I was wrong. He turned to the staff. This is why we have policies. Trust is earned. And Ethan? You just lost it. Daniel watched the scene unfold, his blood simmering. He had seen enough in his years to recognize a setup when he saw one. Mark was too calm, too rehearsed. And the smirk on his face, the way his shoulders relaxed slightly, told Daniel everything. Ethan stood frozen, his face a storm of emotions. Mark, please. You're suspended. Mark's voice was final. Go home, Ethan. We'll see if the owner wants to deal with you after this. Ethan inhaled sharply, as if the weight of those words had knocked the air from his lungs. He looked around, searching the faces of his co-workers, but no one spoke up. Fear held them in place. Daniel, still in disguise, kept his silence as well. But unlike the others, he wasn't afraid. He was watching. And soon he would act. The night air was thick with silence as Ethan walked out of the restaurant, his footsteps slow, uncertain. The glow of the streetlights cast long shadows, his own stretching out in front of him like a reflection of the burden weighing on his chest. His hands trembled at his sides, knuckles white as they clenched into fists. He hadn't stolen anything. He knew that. But the doubt in his co-workers' eyes, the way no one had spoken up for him, it gnawed at him, hollowing out something deep inside. Mark's accusation rang in his ears. You were the last one in there. Ethan exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. His mind raced, searching for anything that could explain what had happened. But there was nothing. No missing step, no forgotten detail. He had done exactly what he was supposed to. So how had the money disappeared? Inside the restaurant, Daniel continued his work in silence, pushing a mop across the floor. He kept his posture relaxed, his movements unhurried, but his mind was razor-sharp, piecing things together. Mark had been too quick, too eager. The moment Ethan had left the office, the trap had sprung. And now Ethan was gone, the perfect scapegoat for whatever Mark had orchestrated. Daniel's gaze flickered toward the office door. He needed answers. The restaurant emptied as the last of the employees clocked out. Mark, still fuming, retreated to the back, locking the office behind him. A few minutes later, he emerged with his coat slung over one shoulder, whistling under his breath. The act was almost convincing. Almost. Lucy, a waitress who had been working at the Silver Fork for over a year, lingered near the counter, wiping it down even though it was already clean. Her hands moved in slow circles, her eyes darting toward Mark as he strolled past. "Late night?" she asked casually. Mark smirked. "Not anymore." He patted his pocket. "Got everything squared away." Lucy forced a smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Daniel watched their interaction, the way Lucy's fingers tightened around the rag, the flicker of something unreadable in her expression. She knew something. Mark pushed open the door and disappeared into the night. The second it shut behind him, Lucy exhaled, sagging against the counter. Daniel set his mop aside and approached. "Long shift." His voice was just rough enough to match his disguise, his usual confidence tempered into something unassuming. Lucy blinked, as if noticing him for the first time. "Yeah," she muttered. "Feels longer than usual." Daniel nodded. "That whole thing with Ethan." He let the words hang, waiting. Lucy's lips pressed together. She glanced at the door, as if making sure Mark was really gone, then back at Daniel. "It's not right," she murmured. Daniel leaned in slightly. "You don't think he did it?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No. Ethan's a lot of things, but a thief isn't one of them." She hesitated again, then dropped her voice. "But Mark, he's got a way of making problems disappear when he wants to." Daniel kept his expression carefully neutral. "What do you mean?" Lucy's fingers curled into the rag. "You didn't hear this from me, okay?" Daniel lifted a hand in mock surrender. She sighed. "A few months ago, one of the kitchen guys, David, got fired. Same story. Money went missing, Mark pinned it on him. No proof, just his word against Mark's. And guess who everyone believed?" Daniel didn't need to guess. Lucy swallowed. "Ethan's not the first. He won't be the last." Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't just about jealousy. This was a pattern. Lucy straightened, tossing the rag onto the counter. "Look, I gotta go. Just be careful, all right?" She left before Daniel could say anything else. The restaurant was empty now, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the distant buzz of a street lamp outside. Daniel turned toward the office. Mark had been in there alone before the accusation. If he had set Ethan up, there had to be proof. Moving quickly, Daniel stepped behind the counter and crouched near the safe. The lock was standard, nothing special, but it wasn't the safe he was interested in. His eyes traced the edges of the room until they landed on the security system. He reached out and pressed a few buttons. The screen flickered to life, showing the most recent recording. He scanned the footage, fingers tapping lightly against the desk. There was Ethan, counting the cash, placing it into the safe. And then the feed cut off. Daniel frowned. That wasn't right. He scrolled back further, past the moment Ethan entered, past the earlier hours of the night, until he saw something that made his breath slow. Mark. Alone in the office. Minutes before Ethan had been called in. Daniel watched as Mark stood in front of the safe, glancing toward the door before pulling something from his pocket. He worked quickly, shifting bills, adjusting numbers. Then, with one last satisfied smirk, he stepped away. Daniel's grip tightened on the edge of the desk. There it was. The truth. He exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. He had been expecting something like this, but seeing it confirmed sent a slow burn through his chest. Mark had framed Ethan. Deliberately. Carefully. And he had gotten away with it. For now. Daniel copied the footage onto a flash drive, slipping it into his pocket. He had what he needed. But exposing Mark wasn't just about proof. It was about timing. The next day, Ethan didn't come to work. Mark, of course, acted as though nothing had happened. He barked orders, smirked when employees whispered about the missing money, carried himself with the arrogance of a man who had won. Daniel played his part, blending into the background, waiting. By midday, Lucy found him again, this time near the dish station. She glanced around before leaning in. I shouldn't be saying this, but if you want to know the truth, check the backup files. Daniel arched a brow. Backup files. Lucy nodded. Mark's careful, but he's not that smart. He deletes footage, but the system keeps a secondary copy for 24 hours before it wipes. She hesitated. No one ever thinks to check. Daniel smiled. Thanks, Lucy. That night, after closing, he accessed the system again, pulling up the backup files. Sure enough, the full recording was there. Unaltered. Mark's guilt, in crystal-clear footage. Daniel leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. He had him. But there was one thing left to do. The next morning, Mark arrived to find a note taped to his office door. *, we need to talk. Tonight. After closing. *. No signature. Just instructions. Mark frowned, ripping the note down. He scanned the restaurant, but everything looked normal. Employees working, customers eating. Nothing out of place. Still, he felt it. A shift. A change in the air. That night, when the restaurant emptied and the doors locked, Mark walked into his office, expecting to find whoever had left the note. Instead, he found Daniel. Not the janitor. Not the faceless worker. Daniel Carter. The owner of the Silver Fork. Mark froze. Daniel smiled, slow and deliberate. Sit down, Mark. Mark's throat bobbed. What? Daniel pulled out the flash drive and set it on the desk. Mark's face drained of color. Daniel leaned forward. Let's talk about Ethan. The trap had been set. And this time, Mark was the one caught. The air inside the office was thick with tension. The small room, usually just a space for paperwork and managerial duties, now felt like the scene of an interrogation. The dull hum of the overhead light flickered slightly, casting shifting shadows across the desk where Daniel sat, his posture composed but his presence commanding. Mark stood frozen in the doorway, his fingers twitching slightly as his gaze flickered from the flash drive on the desk to Daniel's unreadable expression. A bead of sweat formed at his temple, his throat bobbing as he forced a nervous swallow. What's this? Mark asked, his voice tight. Daniel leaned back in his chair, tapping a finger idly against the desk. It's proof. Mark let out a short, forced chuckle, but it lacked conviction. Proof of what? Daniel studied him for a long moment before speaking, his tone almost casual. Of theft. Of a setup. Of you framing an innocent employee for something you did. He tilted his head slightly. You really thought you could keep getting away with it? Mark's jaw clenched, but he quickly masked his panic with a scoff. That's ridiculous. I did no such thing. Daniel gave a slow nod, as if considering his words. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached for the laptop on the desk and inserted the flash drive. Within seconds, the screen flickered to life, and Mark's reflection appeared on the monitor. There he was, captured in clear resolution, standing in front of the safe. Alone. The footage played silently, but the evidence was undeniable. Mark adjusting the cash, slipping some into his pocket, making sure the count was off before calling Ethan in. Mark's face drained of color. Daniel let the video loop once before pausing it at the precise moment Mark smirked at his handiwork. He turned the laptop toward him, allowing him to fully absorb his own betrayal. Still ridiculous? Daniel asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Mark's lips parted, but no words came out. His mind was scrambling for an escape, a way to twist the truth in his favor. But this time, there was none. Daniel stood slowly, each movement measured and deliberate. Tell me, Mark, how many times have you done this? Mark's mouth opened, then shut. He shifted uncomfortably. It was a mistake, he stammered, suddenly desperate. Look, I didn't take all of it. I was just... Daniel held up a hand, stopping him. Don't insult me with excuses. Mark's breathing was shallow now, the weight of his exposed crime pressing down on him. He looked toward the door, but Daniel's presence might as well have sealed it shut. I built this place from the ground up, Daniel continued, his voice edged with restrained anger. Not for people like you to manipulate and destroy. Ethan isn't the first employee you've done this to, is he? Mark shook his head wildly. No, I mean yes, but, he stopped, realizing his mistake too late. Daniel let the silence stretch. Let the truth sink in. For a moment, the only sound in the office was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Daniel exhaled, his voice dropping to a level that sent a shiver down Mark's spine. Here's what's going to happen. Mark flinched, but he stayed rooted in place, eyes locked on Daniel like a trapped animal. You're going to confess, Daniel said, his voice smooth but firm. To everyone. To Ethan. To the entire staff. You're going to tell them exactly what you did, and then you're going to walk out of this restaurant and never come back. Mark's breath hitched. You can't be serious. Daniel's eyes darkened. I could have called the police. Mark's face went pale. Daniel let the words hang, watching as they sunk in. This isn't about your job anymore, Mark. This is about your freedom. If I hand this footage over, you won't just lose your position here. You'll lose everything. Mark visibly swallowed. His hands trembled as he gripped the back of the chair in front of him. I can fix this, he whispered, his voice cracking. Please just... Daniel shook his head. You made your choice the moment you decided to betray the people who trusted you. Mark's breath came in short, uneven bursts. His shoulders slumped. For the first time, the bravado, the arrogance, everything that had made him feel untouchable, crumbled. The reality of his situation was unavoidable. Daniel watched the realization settle in before nodding toward the door. Go. Mark hesitated for only a moment before his legs carried him forward. As he pushed open the office door, the restaurant staff stood gathered outside, their faces a mixture of confusion and quiet anticipation. Word had spread quickly. Lucy had made sure of that. Ethan was among them, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His expression was guarded, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes, as if he wasn't sure whether to believe that justice had finally arrived. Mark stopped short, his gaze darting across the waiting faces. His breathing was unsteady, and for a second he looked like he might run. But Daniel stepped out behind him, standing tall, waiting. With the weight of the moment pressing down on him, Mark took a slow, shuddering breath. Then, his voice barely above a whisper, he spoke. I lied. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, but no one interrupted. I set Ethan up, Mark admitted, his voice growing hoarse. I changed the register count before he got to the office. I made it look like he took the money. He swallowed, the words tasting like poison. But he didn't. He's innocent. Ethan exhaled sharply, his hands unclenching at his sides. Daniel stepped forward. And... Mark's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to continue. I've done it before, he confessed, shame painting his features. I made sure other employees got blamed so I wouldn't get caught. He lifted his gaze slightly, his face a mask of guilt. I'm sorry. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Ethan took a step forward, his voice steady. You ruined my life, he said, his eyes searching Mark's for any sign of true remorse. You made me feel like I was nothing. And now you think sorry is enough. Mark had no answer. Daniel let the moment stretch before speaking. Leave. Now. Mark didn't need to be told twice. He turned and walked out, the weight of countless eyes following his every step. The restaurant door swung shut behind him, and just like that, he was gone. The silence lingered, heavy and uncertain. Then, slowly, all eyes turned to Daniel. Daniel met their gazes, his voice carrying through the room. Ethan was innocent. He let the words settle, looking directly at Ethan. And I should have seen it sooner. Ethan blinked, taken aback. Wait, you knew. Daniel exhaled, nodding. Then, to everyone's surprise, he reached up and removed the janitor's cap he had worn for weeks. The moment his face was fully visible, a hush fell over the room. Recognition dawned. The owner, someone whispered. Lucy's eyes widened, her mouth parting in shock. Ethan stared, disbelief written across his face. "You've been here this whole time?" Daniel nodded. "Watching, learning. And tonight, I finally saw the truth." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every employee. "I built this restaurant to be a place of honesty, of hard work. What happened here should never have been allowed." He let the silence linger, his tone softening. "But it won't happen again." Ethan released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Daniel stepped forward, extending a hand. "If you're willing, I'd like you to stay." For a moment, Ethan hesitated. But then slowly he reached out, grasping Daniel's hand in a firm shake. A new beginning. A well-earned truth. And for the first time in a long while, justice had finally been served.